Good morning, men. Last week, I told the story about my son's sandwich in the back seat of the car, smelling up the car, and I said I'd come back to that, and then I realized after I walked out of here I never did. The point of all that is that when we listen to the stories that are out there that are not true, that's how those stories end up. That's what that was supposed to be all about. I have a couple of announcements I'd like to make as we begin this morning. The first one is to mention that our new book, Coming Back to God, is just out. We have some copies here this morning if you want to pick one up. I believe that this is the most important book that I have ever written, and I'm going to tell you briefly why. The other 8 books that I've written have all been written in the voice that I've done my homework. Here's how it is. You can trust me. I've changed my voice in this book, though, because I wanted to write a book to men who maybe are believers, but many who are not, who perhaps have become a little jaded or cynical about Christian things. And so this basically assumes nothing. This is a proof, if you will, for the reasonableness of Christianity. So it's an apologetic for Christianity using futility as the starting point. We've talked about many of these themes in here. The book really, as you know, all these books come out of the overflow of what we're doing together here. This is a tremendous evangelistic tool. I also believe that every Christian would find a great deal of comfort and satisfaction in reading it too. And since it's a book for men, half of it is fiction, a story. Several stories that I weave through the first half of each chapter is written in a fictional manner. So the early reports are very favorable. I encourage you to take a look at that. Buy it, read it for yourself, but then find someone who either doesn't know the Lord or a prodigal or a cultural Christian and encourage them to take a look at it. So, Coming Back to God. Another announcement, the webcast of our Bible study. I don't know exactly what this means, but it's kind of fun. Over 1,000 people have requested to receive the weekly email reminder for the weekly study that we're doing here. So I don't know how many of those will actually watch it, but that's a lot of folks. And so after 6, 7, 8 weeks out there, it's very exciting to see the reception to what we're doing on the webcast. So, all right, we're going to be talking now this morning on the 6th task of an effective father. And then we're going to take a 1-week break next week. And I'm going to talk to you next week out of 2 Chronicles chapter 15, if you want to look ahead. And the title of the message will be The Secret of Long-Term Success. That's next week. And then we'll go back to the fathering series. My son, John, had a coach/teacher who is one of those guys who speaks kind of gruffly and abruptly, doesn't have a lot of, he never went to charm school, okay? And so my son, who he's a sensitive person. He's not an oversensitive person, but I think all men are sensitive. And he took it that this coach/teacher didn't like him. And then one night they had an awards ceremony, and they were handing out certificates for all the boys on the team, and the coach shook the hands of all the boys, except that my son, down at the end, kind of got behind another boy and Coach didn't see him, and so Coach did not shake my son's hand. So now John comes home and says, "See, Mom, I told you, he doesn't like me." Patsy, being a wise person, figured that the coach's intentions were far from what my son suspected they were, so she made an appointment and went in to see the coach. Of course, as you can imagine, when she unraveled the story, he was horrified, totally embarrassed, shocked by that, and so for the next couple of weeks kind of poured the charm on my son John and made him feel like $1,000,000. And he came home one day and he said, "Mom, can you talk to the rest of my teachers too?" As I get a little older, I find that a lot of the judgments I made about my parents' intentions and the intentions of other adults have become more generous. I don't know if you found that to be the case, but my perceptions just tend to become a little bit more generous toward them. And regarding my own family, my own growing up experience, one thing that's helped me a lot is 4 years ago, I began a journal of my own childhood memories. I wanted to sort out what's fact and what's fiction. Because, you know, we kind of get on this track of thinking about our past. And a lot of times, that perception is very different from the reality. And so I wanted to sort this out for myself, and so I have created a very long journal of different things. One of the things that surprised me when I did this journal, and I've been adding to it, I think I've had 3 major periods now in 4 years when I've put blocks of information in here, memories in here. One thing that surprised me is how many great things have happened to me growing up. Frankly, since I left home in sort of a rush and went off and joined the Army, my perception was that my childhood had been a lot more difficult than it really was. And some great things happened to me. You have your own great things too. Now for me, a few of the things, I remember flying with my dad on Ozark Airlines, and the stewardess giving us chewing gum. They called them stewardesses back then, giving us chewing gum when we got on the plane. My dad took me with him on a trip. I remember eating hot dogs at the band shell on a Saturday morning, and all us little kids would go get these hot dogs, and then we walk around the outside of the band shell and get back in line and finish the hot dog as we walked around the band shell. Great things like that. Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, playing Swamp Fox in the neighborhood, all over the neighborhood, Little League Baseball, watching the Harlem Globetrotters on TV and then going out in the front yard afterwards and going berserk. Swimming lessons at Fern Creek Pool, ice cream trucks, chasing the ice cream trucks at night and hitching a ride on the back. The Royal Castle opened, and you could get a hamburger for a dime and a root beer for a nickel. Fighting Nunny Seymour. This kid terrorized me when I was growing up. He was a couple of years old. His name is Nunny, and his big brother's name was Bubba. You go figure it out. And Nunny went on to have a pretty rough reputation. I think most of it was legend, but part of the legend was that he cut a guy up with a broken whiskey bottle, and that he did 3 tours in Vietnam, volunteered to do 3 tours of duty in Vietnam. He was a pretty tough little wary guy. But he used to pick on me mercilessly. Now, I know this isn't Christian, but my dad told me, you go out there and you fight Nunny Seymour, and you don't come back until the issue's settled. Well, you know what? Little Nunny Seymour and little Pat Morley fought for, it seemed like, hours. We fought in our front yard. We fought in the neighbor's yard next door. We ended up across the street rolling around in the grass. And you know what? I couldn't beat that kid up. But you know what else? He couldn't beat me up either. He never bothered me again after that. Not that, that was just great. I was the king of my 6th grade class. Amy Poteet, my first girlfriend, first kiss, sort of a kiss. Two bodies touching each other at the point of the lips, no action other than that. The Pine Hills Boys Club. Learning to play chess at the downtown boys club when my mom would drop me off. For those of you from Orlando, Herb's Footlong hot dogs with the family. Family vacations, J.C. Beach. With my family, crabbing off the bridge over New Smyrna with chicken necks. With my dad, up on the lake over near Howie in the Hills where the bridge goes across Lake Harris, hanging lanterns somehow over the bridge and fishing. I'm not sure if I have that whole memory, but it was fantastic. Collecting snakes, quail, bullfrogs, raising chickens. Ricky Nelson, discovering music, discovering girls, first date, dancing at the recreation center to Twist and Shout, winning the Spanish award in the 9th grade, the highlight of my my academic career. Beatles, went crazy for music, the Doors, the Who, and all that. My dad, this is the extent of my sex education from my father. He said, "Son, dress left." And the extent of my sex education from my mother was this. She had heard about this girl. I'm not going to give you her real name because she's probably still around somewhere. I'll call her Bonnie, okay? It's pretty close to her real name. And apparently my mother had heard all the rumors that I had heard too, that Bonnie was a girl that was doing it. And my mother was very concerned about this, and so we're riding down the road one day, and Mom said, "Pat, I've heard some stories about Bonnie." And I said, "Oh yeah, Mom, I've heard those stories too." She said, "You have?" I said, "Well, of course, Mom. It's all over the school." And then she took a little booklet that she picked up in the doctor's office or someplace like that. She sort of slid it across the front seat of the car and said, "Well, son, here's a little booklet I think you ought to read." And that was the extent of my sex education from my mother. No, neither one of them ever said another word about it. But it was great. I mean, I loved it. And then it transitioned into the pool hall and Burger King and riding around the Steak and Shake restaurant, going across the street and lifting the hoods up on the cars and oohing and ahhing over all the cars. And then just the preoccupations. Remember your preoccupations. Here were my preoccupations by the time I was really entrenched in high school. Girls, sports, cars, music, friends, and beer. Right? Those are the things that were just preoccupying my mind. But behind all of those things and behind what your children are looking for and behind what all children are looking for, I really wasn't looking for sports and cars and so forth. What I was really looking for, I was looking for acceptance and love, and I was looking for a sense of identity and purpose for my life. And I think lacking that, a lot of times, if you don't get these things, then you often end up leaving home feeling like you've missed out on something. And so when I left home, these being my preoccupations, when I left home, I really didn't have a relationship with God. And so when I left home alone. I didn't have a sense of identity and purpose. I didn't have a relationship with God. And when I was in the Army, I was not only alone, I became extremely lonely. Extremely lonely. Of all the great things that happened to me during the years of my childhood, none of them were great enough to overcome this sense of identity crisis, lack of love, loneliness, and despair that came over me once I left home. I ask you, men, what is the greatest thing that's ever happened to you? What is the single greatest thing that has ever happened to you? No doubt, if you're a Christian, you would answer that the greatest thing that's ever happened to me is to become a follower of Jesus Christ. That I developed a heart for God. And if that's true, men, the follow-up question is, what is the greatest thing that we can do for our kids, for our children? I remember very clearly one day sitting down and analytically thinking about this, thinking, what is the single most important thing that I can do for my children to give them the greatest likelihood of happiness, success, meaning, and purpose in life? And after I filled up a page or two of notes, I crumpled it all up and threw it away, and I said, the single most important thing that I can do for my children is to help them develop a heart for God. And I'm not just talking about that they would be saved, although that too, but that they would actually come to enjoy spiritual things. That they would actually come to enjoy spiritual things. In our text today, at Acts chapter 13, verse 22, we read a wonderful passage that kind of maps out the vision of what I'm talking about. After removing Saul, he made David their king. He testified concerning him, I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. He will do everything I want him to do. David, a man after God's own heart. I told you last week that Howard Hendricks has cited a statistic that says that all of your children, young people in evangelical churches, of all our children, 4 out of 5 of them will leave the church by their senior year in high school. Let me give you another statistic. Jay Strack, another person who deals pretty much exclusively with youth, says that 88%, his statistics show that 88% of our children will leave the church by the time they're seniors in high school. So Hendrick's statistic is 8 out of 10. Jay Strack's statistic is 8.8 out of 10. And guess what? The number one question, the number one concern on the minds of Christian parents in a survey that was done not long ago. The number one concern of Christian parents is, will my children stay true to the Christian faith? Isn't it ironic that the greatest concern that parents have is whether or not their kids are going to stay true to the Christian faith, and they're not doing it? What an incredible disparity that the thing that would be the most precious thing to the heart of a Christian parent is the very thing that's not happening with their children. And what I'd like to suggest to you is that a focusing idea for this whole thing, and this is the big idea this morning, the number one focus of a father should be to help his children develop a heart for God. The number one focus of a father should be to give his children a heart for God. So what I want us to look at this morning, how can a father give his children a heart for God? And I'm going to give you 3 things that you can do, 3 practical things you can do, and 3 practical things that you can have your children do. Now, the idea here is how do you make this appealing to your children? The Christian story, how do you make it appealing to your children? How do you make it plausible for them? And then how do you make it clear? 3 things that you can do. The first one is prayer. The first and most practical thing you can do for your children is to pray for them. Now, prayer is so important. I'm thinking at this point I'm going to do an entire week on it, so I'm just going to leave it there with you. The second thing is to instruct your children. Pray for them. Instruction. If you would, flip over with me to Psalm chapter 78. Psalm chapter 78. And go to verse 1. There's a model here, and this same model is found in other parts of the Scripture, but there's a model here for instructing our kids in the Christian story. We talked last time we were together about the importance of making sure that they have the right story, and that is the Christian story. And you may want to write this down. Basically, the Christian story is this. It's creation, fall, redemption, new creation. That's the Christian story. Creation, fall, redemption, and new creation. And so, in order for a child to understand how the little bits and pieces of their life fits into the Christian story, they need to have some sense of the creation story, the story of the fall, how redemption works, and then how they can participate in that personally, and then the new creation, future glory, the new heavens, the new earth, where we're headed to, so that there's a hopefulness that comes out of it. And you see this outlined, much of it, right here in Psalm 78. O my people, hear my teaching, listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden from old. Things you have heard and known. And where did this knowledge come from? Things we have heard and known. Where did this knowledge come from? Things our fathers have told us. Things our fathers have told us. And what will we do with this knowledge? Verse 4, we will not hide them from their children. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, the power and the wonders He has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which He commanded our forefathers to teach their children. Look at verse 4, the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord. This is how we see God working in creation. Through science. Oh my gosh. We want our children to know about science? Of course we want our children to know about science. God created science. So, theologically, theologians would call this general revelation. It's how God reveals Himself in nature or in creation. This verse tells us to teach our children about general revelation. The praiseworthy deeds of God. And then the next verse, theologians would call special revelation. The special revelation of God is what? It starts with a B, capital B. Bible. The special revelation of God is the Bible. Look at the next verse here. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel. This is God's Word. So God reveals Himself in creation, or in the world, if you will, and in His Word, if you will. Through the world and the Word, God reveals Himself. And we're instructed, we will not hide these things from children. We will tell the next generation about the praiseworthy deeds and about the statutes and commands of God's Word. So that's the instruction part of it. I don't know about you, but my parents delegated all this to other people. And I love my parents. You know, you've heard me talk about how much I love my parents. But they just delegated all this to other people. Now, even this morning, I got up a little early this morning because I was troubled by this. Trying to sort all this out. I said, am I reading back into history something that's not true? I might be, but I can't remember my parents being involved in my spiritual instruction. And it was a huge mistake. It created a lot of problems. More heartache for them than me. I mean, I broke their hearts. So men, be involved in the instruction of your children. And then the third practical thing that you can do is to model your Christian faith before them. And the reason I say that is because, as you well know, your children will imitate you. So that means that in your modeling, you should have two goals. Number one, that there would be a one-to-one correlation between your public and private life. And then secondly, because we know that won't happen, there ought to be honest humility to confess your faults before your kids. One day, when my daughter was 15 years old, we got into a little spat. When they're 15, you get into lots of little spats, right? All right. And, of course, that's all over by the time they're 16, of course. Yeah, right. We got into a little spat, and it got a little out of control. And I, at that point, had a building behind our house where I had an office. And so I went out to the office, and I was really steamed. I was so angry. About 10 minutes later, my daughter came out to make a photocopy. And I did something I'm so ashamed of myself for doing. She walked in the door, and for the first and the only time that I can ever remember, I decided to hurt my daughter on purpose. And I said to her, "What are you doing? You're not welcome here." And with that, she broke down in tears, sobbing, and ran away. And I said, "Oh my God, what have I done? What have I done?" And you know, men, that's the moment of truth. It's from that moment on that many men, because of their foolish pride, don't humble themselves and go make things right. And that's how these 4 out of 5, that's one of the ways these 4 out of 5 kids end up not in the church anymore. So have the goal of having a one-to-one correlation between your life out there and what's really going on behind the closed doors of your own private castle. But knowing that you're going to fail, have the humility to set it right. So moments later, I rushed into the house and said, "Patsy, I've done a terrible thing." I said, I can't believe what I've done, but I told her what I'd done. And I said, what do I need to do? I'm so stupid at that point, I don't even know what to do. She told me what to do, and I did it, and we were able to move right past that terrible incident. And I've never hurt my children before since intentionally. It was such an incredibly gruesome experience. 3 very practical things that we can do for our children is to pray for them, to make sure we instruct them, and that we model for them what we would like them to become. You've heard it said before, I'm sure, that we teach what we believe, we reproduce what we are. And now, 3 practical things that you can have them do. 3 practical things you can have them do. The first and most practical thing you can have them do, not in terms of value, just first in this list, is to make them go to church, to force them to go to church, if you must. Now, some of you have been forced to go to church, and some of you have tried to force your own kids to go to church, and you're thinking to yourself, ha! I finally caught him on something here that he's totally wrong on. You shouldn't force your children to go to church. Ha! I caught you. You're wrong, thinking I'm wrong. Hey, let me ask you this question. Do you think that you should force your children to go to school if they don't want to go to school? Do you? Well, why would any of us ever think we shouldn't force our children then to go to church? If you wanted to become a good golfer, and you said, well, I'm not going to practice golf. I'm just going to show up and play. I'm never going to do anything to practice. And then you went out and you shot 120. Now, who are you going to be mad at? Yeah, the golf course. The clubs. If somebody wanted to play the piano very well, they would never expect that they could never practice the piano and become very good at it. And it's the same way with Christianity. You can't be a good Christian if you don't work at it. You can be a Christian and a bad one, but you certainly can't be a good one without putting some real, genuine effort into making it happen. And where does that happen? That happens at church. Listen, your kids, your children, this is one of the main places where they're going to develop Christian friends, hear about the Christian story, be exposed to meaningful youth activities, and hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. If they're not in church, where do you think they're going to get that? Hopefully they'll get it from you. But if it's not reinforced anywhere else, you put them at great risk. A recent survey, I'm reading from Devotions for Couples, page 204, if you've got it at home. A recent survey on apostasy among college students revealed that children raised in consistently Christian homes are more likely to keep the faith. Consistently Christian homes. The more regular their church attendance and the later in life doubts about their faith came, the more persistent they remained in their beliefs. Those students who had abandoned their early religion cited, take a guess, hypocrisy, racism, dishonesty, and parents who only attended church on special occasions and holidays. So, force them to be in church. That's one thing you can get them to do. Secondly, missions and service. Both of my children have had dramatic experiences by teaching other students in Bible studies and going on mission trips to places like Mexico, or my son went to China one summer. And most young people in our culture just don't have an opportunity to feel the weight of the oppression, of the sting, of the lack of the gospel. And so it's good to have them go out. Those of you who have been in churches where students come back from mission trips, know that for 2 weeks there are always changed kids, right? For 2 weeks. And then they're back in the world again, and then that begins to taper off a little bit. Mission trips are a fantastic way, or service projects, fantastic way, practical thing you can do to give your children a heart for God. And the final thing are devotions. 2 kinds of devotions. One is family devotions, which we did 3 or 4 days a week, 15 minutes in the morning. I would try to come up with an interesting question or a quote to hook them, then read a Bible verse, then give them a principle, and then an illustration or a story about it, and then I'd ask them a question. All took 10 minutes, and then we'd pray. Their prayers are very shallow in the beginning, so we started every morning praying for some one person. We'd ask them to pray for some one person out in the community who is hurting. Everybody didn't need to know who it was. We break in the summer because sleep schedules change. Kids' eyes glazed over almost every morning. I'm thinking to myself, what am I doing here? This is crazy. One day, the woman that was discipling my daughter with a bunch of other high school girls, she said to my wife one day, she said, I don't know what you all do in those devotions, but boy, this must really be special. Because, I'll bring up something in our discipleship group, and your daughter Jen, she said, well, my dad says this, and my dad said that. And I said, I can't believe it, because, at that hour of the morning, she looks like she's comatose. And the other thing is that to encourage your kids to have their own private devotions. Now, those of you who've been around here for a while have heard this before, but I encourage you to bribe your kids to do daily devotions. And here's the plan that we used. We started this when they were at an age where they could appreciate deferred gratification. But Patsy and I got together and we told the kids, if you will do a daily devotion, 5 minutes max, you're not allowed to go over 5 minutes. You can use anything you want, youth walk, Living Bible, 1-year Bible, whatever you want. But if you'll do a daily devotion, if you'll do a 5-minute devotion, and you will do that 25 out of 30 days in a month, you get 5 days grace, we will buy you that month a CD of your choice. Kind of got a blank look. And then I said, but that's not all. If you will do 25 out of 30 days for 10 out of 12 months, we'll give you $250 cash money. All of a sudden, the eyes started bulging a little bit. Gosh, Dad, really? Yeah, and that's not all. If you'll do 25 out of 30 days and you'll do it all 12 months, 12 out of 12 months, we'll give you a double bonus. We'll pay you $500. Well, by now, my kids are very interested. Now, kids are very interested in money. I'm very interested in giving my children a heart for God. Can we get together on this? I mean, the amount of money is not the important thing. Just make it relevant for your own situation. We set it up honor system. We told them, hey, make up a little chart, put an X every time you do it. Hey, if you miss a day, you can make up. That's fine. And my kids, in contrast to most of the kids at the Christian school where they grew up, my kids did daily devotions. One day, they conspired in the annual renewal contract for this, and they'd gotten together and conspired against me. And so I said, well, you want to go another year? And they said, Dad, we've been talking. You don't need to pay us. We're going to be doing these anyway. The number one focus of a father should be to give his children a heart for God. Great things they can have, but the greatest thing is a heart for God. Let's pray. Father, each one of us has our own story of a father or mentor who gave us a heart for something. As we can reflect back on our own lives, Lord, no doubt many of us wish that that would have been a heart for God. Lord, I pray that you would help each of us to make those of us who still have the possibility of doing this, that we would make the central focus of our fathering to give our children a heart for God. Amen. Hold your seats now, just for one moment.